Good morning, Cindy.
Good morning, Dennis.
It is such a pleasure to talk to you. It's been a while.
It has been a while. It's nice to talk with you as well.
Well, I am very excited about today's conversation for the next half hour. We kind of thought, and I know this was your original idea, and then when I heard about it, I said, this is pretty timely and a good idea because it's getting warm out, at least on the East Coast, and a lot of people are starting a vacation. And you thought about the idea of blended families that are vacationing with each other and maybe talking a little bit about that. Basically, if you have stepchildren, step parents, there's all sorts of different blended families that we have in the world now, and it's kind of what today's family is. There's people from all over the place, second marriages and all sorts of different stuff where kids have to cohabitate with each other and parents
Oh,
have to
yeah.
parent other people's kids. I mean, it really is a lot different out there now. So the one thing that I thought about right off the bat when you told me about today's topic is that I imagine that the parents have to have a lot of patience in these situations, especially when you're vacationing with a blended family. You do anyways as a parent when you're vacationing with your children, but this might be a little bit more of a different dynamic, especially if you have other people's children, and depending on how long you've had them too, are they listening to you? Do they obey your commands? And do they follow the rules like they do their biological parents? So I imagine there's a lot of complexities when come with that, and you have to have a lot of patience.
You do have to have a lot of patience. Um, so um, I guess I'd like to talk about step families in general because they
Yes,
are
let's.
so prominent in our world. And then I also just think that this issue, you know, in one way, it's a big challenge. In another way, vacations are a wonderful opportunity. Um, so when people are vacationing, first of all, let's be clear, stepchildren care more about their own parents than they care about their step parents. And let's
Right.
be clear, stepchildren don't pick their step parents, they're stuck with their step parents. And I don't mean that in any kind of cold way. I just mean it because it's the truth. Now, one hopes that there can be a nice budding relationship there. But when I say stuck with, I don't mean that they have a bad feeling about that person. I just mean that when something isn't your choice, then you have to figure out how to respond to something that is a foregone conclusion that you must accept. So that's a very different construction. People pick the people that they want to associate with in their adult lives.
Right.
And it only gets more complicated when stepchildren are vacationing with their parents and their step parent once they're adults.
Right, right. Well, let's do this. Let's put a pin in the vacation part of it because I do want to give everybody some context because I know with all the different kind of therapies you've done over your lifetime and working with people, that I imagine that step families are a prominent topic,
They
and
are.
about how people get along and when how do you get resolution in this very crazy dynamic where you have kids into the equation, and it can be, I imagine, I haven't experienced, but pretty tough on people. So with all that said, when you get an opportunity to talk with couples that are both bringing children in, or maybe one is bringing children in, what's that dynamic like for both of the parents? What that are going to be together? I imagine that while there's excitement for them personally, there's a lot of stress around the children part of it.
Well, I guess the way that I would say it is this is where communication and planning and being proactive and looking forward is so important. So, first of all, before you even decide to enter into a step family situation, the idea that you're thinking about your children and that you're thinking about how to bring them into your partnership in a thoughtful way. So for instance, if parents are divorced or if there is a death in the family, thinking about how long do you wait before you introduce someone to your children,
Right.
and how many people do you introduce them to, because you may be out there dating for a while. It might take you a while to pick the right person. So I'm kind of going soup to nuts from the very beginning.
Hmm.
All these steps along the way, they just matter so much, Dennis, because if children don't feel regarded and how things are handled, it sets up an opportunity to feel resented, for the step parent to feel resented. A
Right.
lot of people don't realize how important these initial stages are, and they only realize it when it becomes a problem. And they don't mean any harm. They just haven't really thought about some of the complexities. Plenty of people do, and more, as step parenting is kind of the new thing that we're all living in now. So
So
at the very beginning, being thoughtful and mindful about how and when. So how long do you want to be dating someone before you bring this person in? Like, do you want to have some kind of boundaries or rules around that you wouldn't be bringing someone in to meet your child until you really decide that this is somebody you really want in your life? Because if they
right.
feel like it's just a revolving door and that they're meeting many people, then by the time they meet that right person, if you're wanting a person in your life, then that becomes a very complicated matter.
So I know that you talk to people about this all the time, and I'm curious, as we talk about children and maybe preteens and teens that are experiencing getting into a new family with somebody that their mom and dad or the partners are dating in that situation, about what it's like for them, because it's not the person it used to be. It's not the mom, the dad, or the partner. And now it's this stranger. And I think the inclination for a young person, a preteen, a teen, is to say, what's going on? Why are you dating my parent? I don't want to have anything do for you. And I imagine that puts just a lot of undue stress on the parent to begin with as they try and start their life over again for whatever 10 million reasons that they are dating and getting with somebody to partner up, that the stresses must be enormous on both ends. But I'm just thinking from the child's point of view, it's got to be traumatic in a lot of areas unless there's a lot of communication going on.
Exactly. It's traumatic all the way around. And
Yeah.
there can be an inclination to be mad at the child about that instead of understanding that for all concerned, it's a big challenge. And the kids don't mean any harm when they're reacting. That usually signals that something about the structuring of how things were planned may not have been there as well as it could have been or should have been. That's not to say that there could be plenty of planning and still the child reacts poorly. But I think that one of the key ingredients, and this would be true both in step parenting in general and in particular on vacation, because that's a special opportunity and challenge, is that children feel that they get to have the time with their parent. That part's
Right.
really important.
Right. Well, I'm curious, and I imagine that for everybody it's different and you're relative to your own situation, but in your experiences, is it harder for the parent that has the kids that is going into a new relationship, or is it harder for that parent that's joining that family that already has kids? And I'm asking this question that the partner that's joining doesn't have kids; they're moving into
Oh,
already
if
an
they're, yeah,
established family. What is it harder on either one, or are they separate for obvious reasons?
Uh, I think they're just different. I
Okay,
think that if it's an imbalanced situation where one person has children and the other person doesn't, then we can imagine, and it's often true, that those perspectives are very different. So in that kind of situation, the person who doesn't have children doesn't know the experience of having children.
right.
So their kind of natural empathy isn't there because they don't have that experience of having a child.
And for me, I'm thinking that, and once again, we're talking in general terms, but that also sets a tone, because you know as well as I do that parents out there just roll different than people that don't have kids.
Absolutely.
And it can be, I think, a strain on people that, and by the way, I always am, people that I meet and couples that I meet and partners that I meet that don't have kids, I say, good for you being selfish. And I say that in the most positive way, because you can be, because you don't have children. Because any parents that are listening right now, you know, you have to be selfless when you have children. That's just the way it is in life. So with all that said, there's that whole dynamic. Now, how about the other one? How about if both sides are bringing in children, and whether they're preteens or teenagers? I know we can get into the moodiness of preteens and teenagers and all that goes with that anyway. But when both sides are bringing in children, I imagine the dynamic's even more of a whirlwind.
It it is. That's a different dynamic. At least there can be more understanding on both sides. I once heard somebody say to their partner something like, I can't be a good partner to you if I can't be a good parent to my children. And that's really true because
Hmm.
that's part of the deal. I'm a package deal. I have children. And then the other person can say, and so am I, a package deal. And that means a lot of negotiation, a lot more negotiation, because what's also understood is, of course, I my children are near and dear and I love them dearly and I've known them since they were born, and you don't have that history with them. And so when they're not acting so pleasant, you don't have the emotional bandwidth to tolerate that in the way that I do. And
Right,
it's true
right.
on the other side. So it requires a lot of using the good brains that we all have to think about it, even though you can't feel about it very well, that you can't use your authentic empathy to connect and try to move beyond. It doesn't mean you're not an empathic person. It's just not there in an immediate way, either because they're not your children, or in the case where you don't have children at all, that's even harder.
I did want to ask you, and something that struck me that you talked about children basically being forced into a situation, not having a say. And I had that several times in my life. And just for some context, we moved around a lot as a family, and I didn't have a choice in that. But I really wasn't jammed up about it. Now I'm a '70s kid, so I was kind of on my own anyway. I know it's a lot different today. And I bring that up because I moved a lot with my daughter, who's 21 right now. And over the years, she's been pretty resentful, especially during her older years, that we moved around a little bit too much for her liking and having to make friends again. And it's a lot different for children than it was when I was growing up back in the '70s. So, with all that said, getting back to your point about children not having a say as they're going into this new partnership, the parents are going into a partnership with a relationship, and there's either kids or no kids, but there's a new person in their life and there's that forcing of it. I imagine, I'd like you to talk once again about communication, about the child's perspective, and situations that you find yourself in, and how to navigate through those very difficult waters.
Well, I think one of the first pieces to this is, you know, if someone doesn't like you, they don't like the way you chew your lettuce. Like you can't make somebody like you. And
Right.
wouldn't it be nice if everybody got along? Sure, it would. And if they don't like you immediately, you don't need to be resentful or hurt about that. You can just understand that this situation perhaps hasn't been planned well enough, and perhaps because of whatever the background story is before the two people partnered, they're sort of in a position to not have a great feeling going into it. So they just may need a lot of time and gentleness and not pushing. So, when you have a sense, you can sense this with kids, like how are they responding when they first meet the person's new partner? Is it going well? If it's not, maybe go gently into that. Maybe don't insist on many meetings right away. Maybe don't be moving in together right away or planning to get married right away. If those things have already happened, then you have to just understand that it still may take that person time to get comfortable. And I would say that the parent, if at all possible, should be in charge of all the disciplinary issues. That the one that sets the rules and holds the frame for the child is the biological parent. And that the more that the step parent can be in a position of kind of being an older friend, the better. That they're showing interest in their life. If you're out and about and you see something, that that person might enjoy, maybe go ahead and give it to them and bring it to them. That you try to be aware of them, show interest in their lives, participate in their lives, not in ways where they feel forced, but that you're just showing up, whether they care about it or not. Like, so if they have an event, you go to the event. Like if they have a recital, or they win an award, or they want to do something, that maybe you're the one that says, I think I remembered you really wanted to see this new Star Wars movie. You know what? I noticed that it's playing. I think we should go. And that the two partners have already talked about this, and that person gets to front load saying it. As the outsider, that's the person that gets to be promoting the fun things, the nice things, but that the harder parts about parenting, particularly in the middle years, should not be given to the step parent. Having said that, though, Dennis, frequently it's common that the step parent is in the position to do that, that they're the ones around the kid. They're the ones driving that kid to their activities. They're the ones dealing with what just happened at school that day, that they didn't go to school, or that they got in trouble, or whatever it is, or that they're not doing their homework, and that sometimes it's still one parent is out, at work, and the other parent is at home. And when that happens, that is a recipe for a lot of stress.
Right, right. And you mentioned something, even though you didn't use these words, because I'm glad you talked about discipline, because I imagine that's a real big deal. But it sounded like there was a good cop and bad cop situation. And with all that said, I imagine the parents, from even like my family, about parents, one of the things my wife, I'm going to digress a little bit because I want to give this context. My wife and I agreed a long time ago with our daughter that we would not gang up on her, both of us. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is that we just wouldn't come down on her hard from both sides. And so somebody had to kind of lay low in that kind of situation, just so there wasn't that ganging up feeling that you can do on a child. That's very easy to do, right? So with all
Right.
that said, in that situation, if the parent of a blended family, the biological parent, is handing out all the discipline, that creates that interesting dynamic that that parent is always the bad cop in that situation. And once again, I'm talking in general terms now, that eventually there could be some resentment that the other parent that has come in the blended family is always the good cop. Why am I always the bad cop? So I see that dynamic possibly happening. So with all that said, what do you do in that situation to not make sure that you're always the bad cop in that blended family?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really good question. I can just tell you that when you take turns too early, it doesn't go well.
Okay.
So, and it may be that in the initial stages, there is some reactivity. What we're wanting is responding, not reacting. We're not wanting kids to react and show you they're upset. We're wanting kids to be able to say, this didn't go well for me. But depending on how open that family is, and this is where sometimes step family therapy is necessary, that there be structured meetings. And if you don't go to therapy, then how about have a weekly meeting, especially at the beginning, to say, okay, everybody gets a lemon and a lime. Tell
Yeah,
me one good thing and one bad thing. And if you don't have any good things, all right, then let's hear the bad things. And
that's a
then
good
do
idea.
it over dessert after dinner.
Yeah, I like.
That we sit and we have a conversation and we have it in some kind of pleasant setting, that kind of an idea. But that people have a venue for speaking up and that their voices are heard.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think, when it comes to family meetings, whether you're blended step or not, I think those are a good idea. Sometimes they can be a little contentious. I've been a part of those too with my family, but sometimes they can be very healthy, where maybe you get some of the bad stuff and the anger out early, but then you start to talk it out. And I've been there many times with my wife and my daughter in those situations. So I think that's really good advice. All right, well, let's circle back now to vacations, because
Yes.
when it comes to vacations in general, uh, first of all, there's no vacations for parents. So when you use the V word, vacation, that doesn't exist, folks. Okay, we all know that as parents, right?
Right. Well,
if you're going
it's
older,
not,
if you're
let's put it
to the
this
lake,
way. It's a meaningful experience, but I wouldn't call it a relaxing vacation.
nobody's getting a break. Well said, Dr.
Yes.
Cindy. Very well said. So with that said, though, talking about the blended family and going on a vacation. So we already have the dynamics we've talked about, and there are 10 billion more that we could chat about. But when somebody's going on vacation for a week, and let's just say the family's going to Disney World, just for the sake of argument, okay? And we've got all the stepkids going, and this is the plan. We're going for a week. What kind of dynamics are we looking at about making sure before you head out on communication and while you're there? I know you've addressed some of the stuff maybe when you're just at home, but now that you're out of your element and your comfort zone of home, and all heck is breaking loose for whatever reason, this band's not working, that kid walked away from us, somebody's late for our activity coming up, all the things that can happen on vacation. I imagine that it gets a little intense, just like it would for any family.
Absolutely. Yeah, it does. And so, again, the planning in advance is very important. So, you know, part of having a vacation is getting excited about it, right? Thinking
Hmm.
together as a family, hey, isn't this going to be fun? Let's think about what do we all want to do? Let's make sure we all have something that we'd like to do included on the trip. Then there's the part about, vacations are a really nice time for that family of origin, that biological parent, to be able to break off with their children or child a little bit on their own. So what this might mean for the parent who is maybe only a step parent and not a biological parent is that that's going to be a little bit of, it's a little downtime for that person. They get a little time to themselves, and that's the way it should be thought of. Not that they're being left out, but that they're being generous and kind to the person with children, and that they're getting to maybe go off and have a latte, sit in a cafe, take a swim, take a nap, walk around the area you're in, but to just kind of choose to be separate for the sake of the child getting to be with the parent, because in step families, they have literally less time with their parent now.
Right, right. I'm glad you brought that up because you said it. My inclination, if I were the parent that was joining the family that didn't have the child, and then the other parent went off with their child, I would feel left out.
Well,
I,
and
re- I, I would.
I hear this a lot, and I spend a lot
Yeah.
of time really working to normalize it and encouraging that person to be generous and kind.
Hmm.
Now, that person needs something back, and it can't
Hmm.
be that that person is just kind of left to themselves and the biological parent goes off with their child or children for the whole vacation. So this needs to be strategically planned. Which are the days, afternoons, mornings, whatever that we want to plan for so that everybody feels comfortable or as comfortable as possible? How would you like it? You might ask your partner who doesn't have children. What would work well for you? Well, you know me, I like to sleep in. Okay, well, good. Then you know what? I'm going to get up. I'm going to go off with my kids in the morning and have some little activities, including breakfast. And you don't even have to worry about any of that. And we'll catch up with you around noon by the pool. I'm just making it up as I go along. And that way, something's in it for them and they get to be part of the solution. And that person gets their time with their child.
Right, right. I'm glad you mentioned that word normalized because in all the things you and I talk about in this series, when we on and have these great discussions, we have the inclination to feel a certain way, whether it's happy, sad, mad, glad, all those things that go with it. And then, excuse me, trying to normalize those initial feelings that are hair triggers, right? And I'm glad you talked about that because it's not an overnight success that you can do that. That takes a lot of time to normalize those kind of feelings. And I imagine you talk about that a lot too in all sorts of therapy sessions.
I do. And, a lot of people really get ahead of steam about these issues, feeling very hurt, very left out, feel unacknowledged for all the effort they're making. Now,
Yeah.
when it's a step family where there are two sets of children, that also is complicated because then it can be a little bit of a battle between sets of kids and competition and whose kids are doing better, whose kids aren't doing well. And so all those kinds of issues can be really complicated as well. Like,
Right.
what if one set of kids from one family is doing beautifully and the other set of kids from the other family are having all kinds of problems?
That's got to be brutal.
It can be brutal. And so the parents have to come together in support of the whole group. How are we going to work together as a family? We're not going to force our kids to be together. And then those kids may or may not have anything in common.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and what if kids have to live in the same house? There's so many things to navigate. I mean, we could spend a long time on this topic.
We
This is
sure
a
could.
whole
Yeah.
subsection of topics. But the point is, communicating about the fact that these challenges are real and they're nobody's fault, and the kid who's reacting need not be blamed, and there doesn't need to be a wicked step parent. I mean, in the fables there's a lot about the wicked stepmother, and those kinds of images are rampant, and nobody needs to be wicked here. Everybody is doing their best often. And when they don't look so hot, it's usually just because they're challenged and not particularly skillful, not because they're bad people.
Right, right. I'm glad you brought up one set of children and the parents getting along and the other not. And we have about 5 minutes left, less than that. I wanted to talk about this specifically. So if we go with the hypothetical, we're at Disney World and we've got two sets of children from both sides, and some are getting along fantastically. They're having a great time. But the other side, they're miserable. They're not getting along with anybody, the parents, the kids, or everything, and they want to go home. I imagine that dynamic as you're on vacation, that can really go into a tailspin where the parents could get into a giant knockout dragon because my kids aren't having fun. Your kids didn't treat them properly. Da 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 da. Let's get out of here. That must happen a lot.
It does. And so I think at the front end, you know your kids, you know who's likely to be a little bit more delicate or vulnerable in that scenario. And so what I would say is lean in, not out, and have an agreement at the front end. You know what? We might have to change our plans.
Yeah.
And one set of parents might have to say, you know what? We're going to hang out here for the afternoon. And you know what? We're going to go back to the hotel and we'll catch up with you later. And catch up with you later may not be an inclusive thing. We may just stay separate the rest of the day because
Yeah.
there's too much going on and it didn't go well. And so rather than ignoring that and forcing people or getting mad at each other, we're just going to understand that this is a very complex situation, again, not of their making. And that if we want to treat them with kindness and respect, we're going to get a lot further with the whole scenario moving forward.
And once again, going back to your original point, normalizing that really difficult situation.
Then nobody's a bad person here. Everybody's trying the best they can, and holidays are a time when kids are looking forward to having a good time and wanting to feel really cared about. And even in a family where there's no step parents, holidays are the precious, like the precious treat at the end of the school year. It's a special time, the very limited but special time that families have together. So you really want to do everything you can to protect that time. And, to not get caught up also, Dennis, I would say not get caught up with, you know what, yesterday wasn't such a great day. Okay, turn the page. We learned a lot yesterday. What are we going to do today?
Right. Right.
I would also say that when people do kind of, the way I put it is step off the curb and end up in oncoming traffic off the curb or fall in the soup, however you want to talk about it, but you're reacting, not responding very well. Those would be moments when I would say, please don't hesitate to apologize, whoever in the family you may be. So if people are actually being hurtful to each other, disrespectful to each other, parents can lead off by saying, I don't know about you, but I did not love the way that I behaved, and I'm really sorry.
Right.
Encouraging their children, if they've been unkind, when they're ready to get back to whoever was the injured party there. Yeah, understanding that if they said it in a way that was unkind, they may not be that skillful or ready. You can't force people to do this, but that when they're ready, it would be helpful if they could take some responsibility for that wasn't such a great way to say that.
Right. That's well said. Well, I can't tell you how much I've appreciated this conversation. And you kind of said it a few minutes ago. We could talk about this for hours, couldn't we? I mean, there's so many
Yes.
layers and tentacles to it in the dynamic that's today's family. So I hope some people got something out of it. And if you feel comfortable, if you want to tell people a little bit about what you do, I mean, we say it off the beginning of our interview about what you do, just to get some context. You're happy to do that. You can tell everybody a little bit about yourself really quickly.
I'm a psychologist in private practice, and I work with older adolescents and families and couples, and so I frequently come across these issues.
Yeah, and you can tell by Dr. Cindy's demeanor that she's got that temperament for talking to people. I always appreciate that when I've ever had therapy, as somebody that's a good listener, as well as being able to give good advice and get you out of your comfort zone. So, Dr. Cindy, can't tell you how much we appreciate your time. Welcome back to the program. We've missed you, and we'll talk to you again very soon on Community DC.
All right, looking forward to talking with you soon, Dennis. Take care.